operates its own private army.
Everyone assumed two things. One was that the Syrians did it, and two, that it was going to be very difficult to prove that they did it, but everybody knew they did it.
And so the international community, the UN, moved with unusual speed. It dispatched a commission to Beirut to investigate. That was 5.5 years ago. UN investigators have since spent tens of millions of dollars groping and in some cases blundering around this country's treacherous political landscape. Now, the UN is reportedly finally ready to issue some indictments, and almost certainly those indictments will rest on the work first begun by Wissam Eid in the months directly after the assassination. The trouble is, the group of killers Eid identified are so powerful and so lethal that seriously pursuing them could provoke another civil war. High in the hills above Beirut, behind the walls of an abandoned hotel, the UN Commission set up the investigation's headquarters. What's left of Hariri's car sits outside, not so much as evidence these days as a reminder. Over the past 10 months, CBC News has talked to more than a half-dozen sources inside the UN's lavishly funded inquiry. They tell a story of gross incompetence, political timidity, and bureaucratic inertia. We can't show you our sources' faces or even let you hear their voices. The information they've conveyed is literally life-threatening. So we've used actors to deliver their words verbatim. Most of our sources say the Commission squandered opportunity and time.
The early days of any investigation are critical. The sort of golden hour of this investigation, I would say, would be the first even 2 years. If you capture good information, good witnesses, the forensic evidence, etc., the golden hour in that environment was maybe a couple of years. But that's gone. That's just gone.
The UN drew all the attention, but it was meant to be a joint investigation with the Lebanese police. Over at the offices of the ISF, the Lebanese Intelligence Service, a young captain had already begun working the case. Wissam Eid was a computer engineering grad who'd been serving his compulsory military duty when the ISF decided it needed his skills. His father, Mahmoud, a former ISF man himself, says Eid was reluctant.
Join the police force. I liked the idea, but he didn't. Not at all.
Ultimately, though, Wissam Eid did embrace the secret world, and he came to the Hariri case with his own notions of how to crack it. Within weeks of the murder, he gathered the records of every cell phone that was in the area of the blast that day and began analyzing the data. At the time, the UN had no idea he was doing this, but looking back, experienced intelligence officers were impressed.
Well, he was very bright. He was obviously not trained, so he made a lot of peripheral mistakes. But the core of what he was developing was right.
Unbelievably, nearly 3 years passed before the UN Commission began to analyze phone records, the sort of work Captain Eid began almost immediately. The Commission obtained records of every single phone call made in Lebanon in 2005, a staggering amount of data. And the specialists from London began drawing up a chart showing which cell phones had always been close to Hariri in the weeks leading up to the assassination. CBC News has obtained a fairly recent version of the telecommunications chart the UN eventually built. It color codes phone networks used in the conspiracy, starting with the one the British specialist identified almost immediately.
Well, when he started looking at it, he came up with a red network in like 2 days. It popped right out for him, which was miraculous. It was earth-shattering in terms of a revelation.
Basically, the red network was the hit squad that actually carried out the assassination. 8 people, all carrying cell phones who'd been tailing Hariri for weeks. After the killing, the phones were never used again.
All of the red phones were either involved in following Hariri before, or they were on site when he died.
Then, When the UN experts began to double-check their own work, there was another revelation, just as earth-shattering. Captain Eid of the Lebanese police had already discovered the Red Network, the hit squad, and a whole lot more. He'd written it up in a report a year and a half earlier, in early 2006. He sent it to the UN, and the UN had promptly lost it.
Even though his report had been given to the commission, nobody had read it. Or at least whoever read it didn't understand it. It was, to be honest, rather embarrassing.
Eid had not only discovered the network of red phones used by members of the hit squad, but another group of people who had backed them up, providing logistical support. The UN dubbed that the Blue Network. And Eid had gone even further, identifying networks behind networks. In short, he'd reconstructed what was obviously a well-planned, disciplined, long-term operation. The Hariri assassination took months to plan, which gave some of the people involved time to get sloppy. Eventually, one operative did something extraordinarily stupid. He used a supposedly secure operational phone to call a girlfriend, giving Osama Eid the break he'd needed. Eid quickly identified Abdul Majid Gamlouche, an electronic specialist with the Party of God, Hezbollah.
He was charged with disposing of the blue phones. He was a bit of an idiot, and he took one of them and used them for his personal cell phone. He was supposed to take all of the blue phones and get rid of them. He wasn't supposed to use any of them.
Gamlouche's blunder led Eid to a second Hezbollah leader in South Beirut, and there was another pattern. Everything seemed to trace, directly or indirectly, to Beirut's Great Prophet Hospital, which is said to contain a Hezbollah command center. Finally, the Party of God called Captain Eid directly.
Hezbollah says to him, these phones that you're investigating that you asked about, these are Hezbollah phones. Furthermore, these phones are part of a counterintelligence group that's following a bunch of Israeli spies. Therefore, you can't investigate these phones. Now, what I like about it so much is that Hezbollah admitted that the phones that were calling the Red Network were Hezbollah phones.
But Hezbollah's threat was crystal clear. By late 2007, Captain Eid had become increasingly worried about his own safety. He'd taken to living in his office.
I felt things. I knew that the road he was taking would eventually lead him to death. His father told me to try to convince him to at least change the kind of car he was using to commute, the Jeep he was using to come to Tripoli.
Then, one day, he asked his brother Mohammed to come visit and to bring the video camera.
Sans aucun doute, puisqu'il savait très bien qu'il était mort d'un jour à l'autre. Il a voulu nous laisser quelque chose, peut-être.
It wasn't long after this video was shot that the UN investigators first stumbled across Captain Eid's lost report in their database. They finally reached out to him in January 2008.
Well, that is when we started meeting with Eid, because all of a sudden it was, well, who is this guy, and how did he do this? And to be honest with you, at the time, the skepticism was that he couldn't have done this by himself. I mean, there is no way one guy with no database like we have could have done all this.
But the UN investigators discovered Captain Eid simply had a remarkable mind. After meeting with him once, they were anxious to meet again, and they did, a week later. The next day, on January 25th, 2008, Wissam Eid's prediction of his own death was fulfilled.
They said on TV that there'd been an explosion. It was a Friday, at 9:55 to be exact. I said, if someone died, may God grant his parents patience. Then his father said, that's the road Wissam takes. I said, that's definitely Wissam.
I called his superiors, and they wouldn't answer me with a yes or no. I told myself, he's gone.
At the UN Commission, the reaction was not only grief, but outrage and shame.
It was so clear to us that it was because of us that he died. There's no doubt in my mind. His report had been in existence with the Commission for at least a year, and nothing had happened. It wasn't until we started meeting with him that he ended up dead. We all felt responsible for this, to be honest with you.
Just outside the northern city of Tripoli is the hometown of Captain Wissam Eid. He's a hero here. His picture hangs everywhere. Major Wissam Eid, he was posthumously promoted, may have cracked the case, but no one seriously believes the Lebanese authorities will ever arrest anyone from Hezbollah.
Sitting where I sit right now in the Washington of 2010, is Hezbollah going to get away with it? Yes. Fewer travesties will be greater, but I don't see where the international will is to take this on. And I certainly don't see, absent that international will, how the Lebanese people can take it on.
Nothing would please the Eid family more than to see Wissam's killers brought to justice. But they know that Lebanon, and perhaps even Hariri's son, whom they hold dear, would pay a price.
Quand on voit les accords politiques, on dit que c'est pas le moment. C'est la réalité du Liban, c'est la réalité des choses. Parfois, il faut accepter. On n'a pas le choix.
And so, instead, the mother of Major Wissam Eid offers up a prayer for the son she considers a gift to her country.
لأن الشهيد عند ربه حي لا يموت.
A martyr is alive and never dies. If we have a few more Wissams in Lebanon, young men who love their country and are willing to sacrifice for it, then Lebanon will be just fine.
واستشهد كربال هالبلد العزيز.
In January, Hezbollah brought down the government of Prime Minister Saad Hariri, Rafic Hariri's son, after he refused to denounce the UN tribunal's investigation. A few days later, the tribunal handed down an indictment, but the names of the accused may not be known for months. And that is News in Review. Don't forget to check out our website at newsinreview.cbclearning.ca. I'm Michael Serapio. Thanks for watching. It's a lifestyle that can kill us.
Increasingly, we're cocooning inside of our houses, cocooning within our houses in front of screens.
But do we recognize the dangers?
Do you know how many calories are in the stuff that you've bought today? No clue.
On News in Review today, how healthy are Canadians? Hello, I'm Michael Serapio. Most Canadians, especially young ones, like to think that they're in pretty good shape, but a recent series of studies have shown that not to be the case. We're actually in pretty bad shape, and to make matters worse, we're living in denial. Studies show that about 2/3 of Canadians are overweight and about 20% are clinically obese. But polls show that almost half of Canadians believe their weight is healthy, even though they don't eat properly or exercise enough. And as the CBC's Kelly Crow reports, we're becoming a nation of couch potatoes.
When scientists ask Canadians if they exercise, they say yes. But when researchers actually took measurements, they learned the dismal truth. Canadians spend most of their day barely moving at all.
It seems that the more accurate the information we get, the worse the story is.
It's called an accelerometer, and Statistics Canada researchers asked 4,400 Canadians to wear one for a week, recording every movement. When they looked at the data, they discovered 85% of adults are not meeting even basic activity levels. Neither are 93% of teenagers and youth.
It is doom and gloom. We can't very well find much positive about this.
When they took a close look at a typical day, the picture was grim. Canadians spent less than 5% of the day moving fast enough to quicken their breathing. 25% of the day was spent moving lightly, walking to the car, for example, which means 70% of the day was spent being almost completely sedentary.
Even if you do exercise but still spend most of the rest of the day doing nothing, your risk might actually be almost as high as if you didn't do any exercise.
Nicole Novakovics knows she should get more exercise, but with a newborn and a 4-year-old, her question is when and how.
To make time for yourself is almost impossible.
Sandy Patira works part-time and also has 2 small children.
And especially with little ones, it's hard.
How much activity are people supposed to be getting? The recommendations have recently changed. For adults, the experts now recommend at least 2.5 hours a week of moderate to vigorous exercise, enough to sweat and start breathing heavier. Children and teenagers need more, at least 60 minutes a day.
And the targets are very modest. They represent 1, 2, 3% of our daily time that we're asking people to be physically active.
The secret? To make movement a routine part of the day. Walking, using the stairs, it all counts as exercise. Kelly Crow, CBC News, Toronto.
If we're going to live healthier lives, we also have to watch what we eat. But again, studies show that many Canadians are living in denial, unaware of how many calories they are consuming. To demonstrate that, the CBC's Joanna Remiliotis tracked one family's food for a week.
We gave an average food-loving family a challenge. Armed with these diaries, we asked them to log everything, and we mean everything, they eat for an entire week. That means breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, even Smarties.
So start from the